All right, here we go. The Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac. So, first and foremost, shout out Blaze Clancy for putting me on, and shout out his brother Kellen, because I would not be reading it if it weren't for you two. So, thank you very much for the recommendation. I really enjoyed it. So, Dharma Bums, Jack Kerouac. For context, Jack Kerouac is the author of On the Road, a very famous, popular book. I think it's maybe top 30 best-selling in America all time. Right, and this is in the context of the Beat generation, the Beatnik, right? American counterculture in 50s and 60s. So that's a really important thing to know going into this book. That's where this kind of takes place. So to give it, I don't really want to do a whole crazy summary, but basically the Dharma Bums kind of gives you a good idea of what this book's about. Bums refers to the Beat generation and their kind of livelihood, right? American counterculture, right? Against the traditional conservative Christian nuclear family, get a job, be grounded kind of American ideal that was very prevalent in the 50s and 60s. And these bums, right? Jack Kerouac himself and a few other characters are on a journey constantly, right? With no destination, no serious possessions, right? Nothing permanent, and no attachment to anything or anyone. And then the Dharma, referring to this concept of Buddhism, right? The Dharma is literally translated as the truth in Buddhism. And this concept is particularly hits home for me because I'm a Buddhist. Maybe not the best Buddhist in the world, but I'm not sure these characters are either. So it's all right. But and then one other thing I'd like to note about this book is that it reads as Jack's real life. It's not an autobiography. It's more a journal, a polished journal, I guess. But even that, it's really just typing, right? Instead of writing and trying to make everything perfect. Instead of making it perfect, he tries to make it real. So that's about as far as I'll go as a summary, but really enjoy it and really recommend it. What I want to get into is three main ideas that I really enjoyed about this book. I think the first big theme that I want to talk about is the use of poetry is very prevalent in this book. So very early on in the book, you're kind of just dropped into the story, and Ray, he's called Ray, it's Jack. I don't know why he's called Ray. I don't really understand. But Ray, the main character, he meets Jaffe, and he meets Jaffe the first scene. He meets him in Berkeley, and he's in this amphitheater of sorts, and he's with 30 other people, and there's 29 distinguished, well-known poets, well-dressed, very upkept of themselves, and then there's Jaffe. And Jaffe is a bum, a Dharma bum, right? And he's one of the best poets of the bunch, and they all respect him. And that's kind of where you're dropped in. So you have this guy who has no attachments, no nothing like that. He's a bum, and he is an amazing poet. And obviously Ray, or Jack Kerouac, writing a best-selling novel, one of the most influential books of all time, is no stranger to writing and poetry and prose and all that either. So they are constantly bickering in poetry, and they are always trying to find a way to say what they want to say in the most artful way. And I connected that to a Buddhist idea that I find very cool. Let me look at my notes real quick. What I'd say is the poetry serves as an active practice of the Dharma for these characters, reminding them to live artfully, spontaneously, and ultimately embrace the perfection in the imperfection. As with poetry, with life, there is no right way to do it. Rather, the measure of success, if even measurable or relevant, is determined by the touches of rawness, individuality, effort, passion, expressed by the work. While ultimately beauty or success is in the eye of the beholder, everyone is beholden to their own path in their lives, a timeless, boundless path of self-discovery. Certain characteristics of these characters' poetry practice serve as guiding principles for their Dharma in their own lives, such as their emphasis on spontaneity and foundation of meaningless meaning behind the poems. So, spontaneity, they encourage each other to come up with their poetry on the spot. Jack, go and say your poetry, and he has a couple seconds to come up with some kind of poem. They really like to stress the idea of spontaneity, just spontaneously coming up with something. And this idea of spontaneity, in their prose, reminds them that no action they will take will ever be perfect. But the truly artful ones are made in moment's notice, within the flow of things, never hesitating, never resisting. Their poetry's, pretty awesome, huh? Their poetry's foundation of meaningless meaning often revealed in the context of interrogative question meant to challenge the poem or Dharma, reminds them that words, ideas, labels, assumptions are ultimately useless in relating the Dharma, the truth, reality as it truly is, suchness, thatness, thusness, isness, right? If you don't really follow Buddhism, that's probably all a bunch of malarkey. But yeah, their use of poetry is very beautiful, and it really made me think. It made me think a lot, and it inspired me to live in a more artful way, not even just in, writing poems all day, but living artfully, not perfect. Love that idea. Another key concept, this is kind of tied into the concept of meaningless meaning behind their poems. Another way to write the thatness, suchness, the reality as it is, the kind of emptiness. All these things describe it, but ultimately, right, words, labels, ideas, they will never be able to describe reality as it is. They're ultimately useless in describing how that works. So they convey this idea. They have to convey ideas outside of words. So I really appreciate how this book took this Buddhist concept that's almost paradoxical, very hard to describe, right? How can you enlighten somebody if you can't tell them how to be enlightened, right? It doesn't even make any sense. So a couple parables I really liked, or moments. One of them is, this happens very early on in the book, and Ray asks a Buddhist in the fellow, I think it's in the amphitheater, a fellow Zen Buddhist, or I believe they're at a restaurant. And he asks, why did the Buddha travel east? And the other Zen poet responds, I don't care. And, the idea expressed there is that unknowing, right? Unknowing is more important than knowing, much more valuable than knowing. Because the truth is it's beyond words, right? Another one, there's a parable that they describe that I really like. This is a Buddhist parable. A student goes to his master, his headmaster at the monastery, and he says, how can I achieve enlightenment right now? And the Zen master flaps him on the head as hard as he can with his stick. And in that moment, the student becomes enlightened. The idea here, right, if the student really wants to be enlightened, the words are ultimately useless. The expressions, the ideas, their labels, they're useless, because enlightenment is not attained. It's not explained. Enlightenment is. The rawness, the moment of rawness in present experience is much more valuable to the attainment of enlightenment than an explanation would be, right? And this comes to a beautiful end. This idea comes to a beautiful end. That's that's really, really, really cool. When Jack is like 3/4 in the book, he visits home again, and he spent some time with his little nephew, who's about 9 years old, and they're writing poetry together. And Elliot comes up with a poem, and it's something about the birds, and the birds go chirp chirp, and the grass flows, and the blah blah blah, and the eagles go hark hark, the hawks go hark hark, right? And then Ray, almost as if to test him, says, what does that mean? And then what happens? And Elliot says, hark hark, hark hark, just like the eagles or the hawks in his poem said. And this is beautiful because Ray, when he asked that question, Elliot, his nephew, instead of explaining it, saying, oh, well, the poem means this, and I used the double stanza to blah, 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 and dumbing it down to the intellectual meaning and the intellectual slop of it all, he gets it. He gets it that there's meaning in the meaninglessness. Hark, hark, right? Why dumb his work down to intellectual slop when the rawness of expression was the whole point to begin with? It's the whole point anyway, right? So hark, hark. And to this, Ray is delighted, and he knows he has done good in the world, and it was very good. And then he ends up, beautiful, beautiful. So those are two Buddhist concepts. I'll give you a break with the Buddhist ideas, right, and be a normal person. One other, the other kind of idea in this book is the beat generation, right? The idea that they're bums, These guys don't have a house. They travel around the world. They go hitchhike, and they're just living free. No attachments to anything or anybody. And this is the idea. This is like hippie culture before it was hippie culture. But what I like best about it is that they don't describe it as the right way to live. Mainly Ray and Jaffe and the other people that they hang out with, they don't describe it as the right way to live. It's their way to live. And there are moments in the story when there is a harmony between the bums living their untraditional way and the lay people they meet, the people living their traditional American life with the nuclear family and the job and the possessions and the Christianity and the blah, blah, blah. And this is summed up beautifully in two scenes that I really enjoyed. One, on Jaffe's way back home when he's hitchhiking, he gets a ride with a truck driver, and the truck driver says, "You familiar with Mexico? You familiar with this town of Mexico?" And Ray is, because he's been all over the place. And he says, "Well, if you show me around, I'll give you a ride back to North Carolina. I'm going that way anyway." So they do, and they go out and they party and have a great time. And this truck driver, he's a dude with a job. He has a 2-car garage, a nuclear family at home. And they kind of rub off on each other. And they have a really, really good time. And then halfway through their way back to North Carolina, they stop and they try and go to the steakhouse, but it's closed. But Ray says to him, if you buy a steak, I'll cook us the best steak you've ever had in your life, just on a fire. And he does some technique where he buries it in the ground and does this whole thing. And the truck driver eats it and he goes, "Well, goddamn, that is the best steak I've ever had in my life." And he says, "Ray, you know what? I have the job and I make all this money and I'm supposed to have all these things, but it seems at the end of the day, you're a bum and you're living better than me. You're free and you know how to do all these cool, funny things. How did this happen?" And there's the moment of mutual respect where they really respect each other. And it's beautiful to see that harmony coming together, And if there's anything you listen to this whole book review, the most beautiful moment that I think really sums up all that is good in this book comes near the end of the book when there is a big going away party for Jaffe, the other main character, right? He's going to Japan, he's taking a boat, and he probably won't ever be back. That's how it is. So they're having this massive party near Berkeley or something. It's one of the other people's houses, and massive, like 5-day party, and everybody comes in their nicest business suits. It's this big formal thing. And on the 3rd day of partying, at one point, I don't know who it is, but, people just start taking their clothes off. Jaffe's one of them, stripped butt naked. And they're walking around, and, there's booze, and there's music, and there's, sex going on, flying all over, orgies all over the place. And then there's one scene that was described succinctly but so beautifully where there's 4 men sitting at the campfire, 2 of them in nice suits, one brown, one blue. They're nicest suits. These people are traditional. They have a wife and kids, they have a job, and then they're talking to 2 men completely naked around the campfire. And they are completely in conversation, talking about some politics or some state of the world affairs. And in that moment, there's an acceptance, a mutual acceptance that no matter how different they could possibly be, 2 people in their formal lives with their business suits and 2 people who are bums who have no possessions and have a completely different philosophy of life, 2 naked and 2 in suits, and they are just accepting completely. There's no ambiguity. It just is. It's all good. And that is very, very, very beautiful. Yeah, man, that's about it. Thank you for listening. Hopefully many more to come. On the road coming next.